When I was in college, I attended a Bible study in which we were going through Romans chapter 9. And as we were going through Romans chapter 9, we came across a lot of challenging Bible verses. And they challenged me, the people next to me, they challenged the teacher in the class, and they even challenged the pastor who was over the teacher in the class. And it was challenging because these Bible verses had to deal with things like predestination and the concept of election. And so I would be going through and I'm reading Bible verses like Romans chapter 19, verse 9, and I can't quite understand it. So God raises me up, then he hardens my heart. Why am I still in trouble for this? Like, how am I supposed to fight God? How am I supposed to fight that? But who are you, a mere human being, that you should talk back to God? Shall what is formed say to the one who formed it, why'd you make me this way? All I'm saying is that it doesn't make any sense. If I've got a printer and I use it to print off my book report, it doesn't make any sense for me to take that printer, throw it outside, and then smash it with a hammer because it printed off the book report. It's just confusion. All I'm saying, bro. And as I was reading this, my concern was that God was creating an accepted group of people or an elect group of people in which your genetics determined whether you got in or not. Your genetics determined whether you would be accepted by God. And that really, really bothered me that night, and it stuck with me for years and years. And I kind of just learned to deal with it. I had this problem, but I knew God was greater than any questions that I might have. But it's really cool because a few weeks ago, as I was working on a sermon from Romans chapter 11, and as I was listening to a podcast from the Bible Project on generosity, I realized that I had made a mistake. When I was reading in Romans, I allowed Romans chapter 9 to define what election meant. But what I needed to do is I needed to start from the beginning of the Bible and use the previous books in the Bible to actually define election. And as I went to the roots of election, what I found is that my presupposition about what election meant in chapter 9 was different than what it meant throughout Scripture. And what I mean is this. When you look in Genesis, you see this really cool characteristic of God. It's an attribute that doesn't get talked about a lot, but we all know it. It's his generosity. God shares his creation with both spiritual beings and human beings, and he shares his authority with both spiritual beings and human beings. And so in the first few pages of the Bible, we see God's generosity. But as we keep going, we run into a man by the name of Abraham. And Abraham is elected or chosen by God. That's what election means, to choose. He's chosen by God from among his people and among his country. And God says to Abraham, I'm going to bless you. There's going to be a nation that comes from you. And every nation on earth is going to be blessed by your lineage. And here's we get a really cool picture of election. When God elects somebody, he's electing them not just for their benefit, but so they can be a blessing to those they're connected to. In other words, election is a reflection of God's generosity. And as the story continues, we continue to see that. When we get to the nation of Israel, we meet an elected guy by the name of Moses, and we see this elected group of people called the Levites and the priests. And among the 12 tribes of Israel, God elects the Levites and the priests. And when he elects them, it's for their benefit, but also so they can bless others in Israel by making sure that the tabernacle is kept up. See, God is so generous that when he gives you a gift, it's so that you can be a conduit or distributor of that gift. In other words, the election wasn't to the neglect of all the other 12 tribes of Israel or the other 11 tribes of Israel. Instead, they all benefited from the Levites' election. And so when God elects somebody, it's a benefit to the elect and a blessing to everybody else. And you see that time after time after time again in the Bible. When you see somebody like Jeremiah, he is elect, chosen by God to be a prophet to the nations, and we're still benefiting from his election today. Whenever you see election in the Bible, it is a reflection of the generous nature of God. The elect person or people or tribe is blessed, and then they in turn bless everybody they're connected to. And so when I have this view of election in my sight, I can look at Romans chapter 9 with a fresh set of eyes. And also, as I'm going through Romans chapter 9, now that I'm a bit older and wiser, I remember that it makes sense to have the context of the first 8 chapters in mind as well. I remember that Romans says that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, but all are justified by faith in Jesus Christ. Where you're born does not justify you. What you do does not justify you, but it's your faith in Jesus that justifies you. And so God, using this faith, is now creating a huge family of people in which their faith in Jesus is the unifying component. And these themes are interwoven through the first 8 chapters of Romans. Now, when I get to Romans chapter 9, chapters 9 through 11 deal with God keeping his promises to Israel. And so when we read chapter 9, the topic of election comes up again. And so the question we're wrestling with is this: are God's elect based off genetics, or are they based off of some other determining factor? And as you read through Romans chapter 9, it's still sticky, but we can use verses 22 and 23 to give us something to work with. Romans 9, verse 22 and 23 read, "What if God, although choosing to show his wrath and make his power known, bore with great patience the objects of his wrath, prepared for destruction? What if he did this to make the riches of his glory known to the objects of his mercy, whom he prepared in advance for glory?" When I first read these verses, I thought that there was only one category of people who could be an object of mercy: the people who were born objects of mercy. But I realized that there was actually another category of people who could be objects of mercy. And so you have 2 categories. One category is people who were born objects of mercy. And the second category of people is people who, through their faith in Jesus, are justified and become objects of mercy. So the question we've got to ask ourselves is, who are the objects of mercy in this passage? Based off of what I saw earlier in the Bible about election being a reflection of God's generous nature, I then had to ask myself another question. Is it more generous for God to create an accepted or an elect group of people based off genetics? Or is it more generous of God to create an accepted group of people based off of faith? And to me, it was obvious. If election can be based off of faith, then anybody can be justified by God. But if election is based off genetics, then only a select few people can be justified by God. So to me, it just seemed far more generous of God to let anybody be justified by him so long as they believe in Jesus Christ. I mean, this just seemed more consistent with his character. And so I'm thankful that God is a gracious God, because now anybody can have a relationship with him so long as they believe. It's based off of their faith and not based off of their genetics. It's not based off who their parents are. So how should this view of election and being a reflection of the generous nature of God affect us today? Well, I believe it should both humble us and motivate us. Because on a much smaller scale, we've all been elected by God. And what I mean is we've all been given some kind of gift or some kind of talent to not only bless us, but to be a blessing to other people. I mean, whenever you look through the Bible, their election was for them and for others. They were blessed to be a blessing. And so now I don't have to hate on my brothers and sisters in humanity who have been blessed with absolutely stunning gifts, because God has given me an absolutely stunning gift. And it doesn't matter the size of the audience, because I have an audience in heaven waiting to see this gift that I have been given shine through me. Not for my glory, not for your glory, but for the glory of God. Now, on a more granular level, this view of election impacts potential disciples of Jesus Christ because it kills a whole lot of assumptions you may have about yourself or that you may have about God. You see, we all ask questions like, does God really love me? Does he really care about me? Or do I matter to him? And when you think that you are a non-elect person, that gets into your head and it clouds your judgment. When you're confronted with your own sin or with bad decisions you've made, it's really easy to say, this is just who I am, and this is just who I'm going to be. But God's elect are not those who have the right genetics, the right parents. God's elect are the people who choose to believe in the lordship and in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. It doesn't matter who your parents are, where you were born, or when you were born. It doesn't matter what you've done in the past. What matters is what you believe. Will you surrender everything to a generous and gracious God? Or will you continue to live your life your way? And finally, when it comes to current disciples of Jesus Christ, many believers talk about being God's elect or being a part of the remnant that God has saved for himself. And they talk about it as if it's a badge of honor instead of a call to action. But when you look at the elect in the Bible, they were elected to bless other people, not just boast in their election. So don't use your status as one of God's elect to get lazy. Instead, we've got to get to work. God's elect should be conduits of his power and his love, his grace, his majesty, his beauty, his gentleness, his compassion, his joy, his peace, and his wisdom. So serve other people more than you serve yourself. Let's get to work and live out this calling. So thank you so much for watching. I hope this video blessed you. And remember, surrendering to Jesus is not just a one-time big decision, but a lifetime of intentional choices. God bless you. Have a great day.